"Remove this pauper," my daughter-in-law said to a uniformed security guard at a family dinner, and for a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to stop breathing. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at her, then at my son, and realized that sometimes the people who owe you everything are the first to pretend they never knew you.
I'm Eleanor Whitmore.
I'm 68 years old, a widow, a mother, and until that evening, I still believed family loyalty meant something. The dinner was being held at a historic restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor, a place with polished wood floors, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the golden lights of a city. My son Daniel had insisted the entire family gather there to celebrate what would have been his father Arthur's 40th wedding anniversary with me. Arthur had been gone for 3 years, but I still carried his memory with me every day. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a navy blue dress and the pearl necklace he had given me on our 30th anniversary. The pearls were modest, but they meant more to me than any diamond ever could. As I stepped inside, I immediately sensed something was different. The hostess smiled politely, but looked confused when I gave her name. She checked the reservation list twice before finally leading me toward the private dining room. That was when I noticed the first strange detail. Every member of the family had a place card arranged neatly around the large table. Daniel, Madison, Charlotte, even distant cousins had assigned seats. But there was no card with my name. Perhaps it was misplaced, I told myself. The hostess hesitated before pointing toward a small table near the service entrance. "I was told this seat was for you, ma'am." I stared at the chair. It wasn't even part of the family table. It sat several feet away beside a swinging kitchen door. Every time the door opened, the smell of food and the noise of dishes spilled into the room. For a moment, I thought there had been some mistake. Then Madison walked in. My daughter-in-law wore an expensive cream-colored dress and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh, good," she said, lightly. "You found your seat." I looked at her. "My seat." She glanced toward the small table. "We thought you'd be more comfortable there." Comfortable. The word landed harder than she intended. I saw a few relatives exchange awkward glances, but nobody said anything. Daniel avoided my eyes. Charlotte, my 17-year-old granddaughter, looked horrified. I could have left right then. Maybe I should have. Instead, I quietly took my seat. Dinner began. Waiters carried trays of food through the room while conversations drifted around me as though I were invisible. Every laugh felt distant. Every toast felt rehearsed. I sat there listening to stories about vacations, investments, and future plans while the people I loved acted as if I were an afterthought. Then came the moment that changed everything. One of the waiters approached me with a menu adjustment, and Madison suddenly stood. "Excuse me," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. She waved toward a security guard stationed near the entrance. The room fell silent. The guard walked over. Madison crossed her arms and pointed directly at me. "Remove this pauper," she said. "She doesn't belong here." The words echoed through the room. Forks stopped moving. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the musicians in the corner seemed to miss a beat. I slowly placed my napkin on the table and looked around the room. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And then, for the first time that evening, every person in that dining room realized something was terribly wrong. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. The security guard looked from Madison to me, and then back again, clearly unsure of what he was supposed to do. I could not blame him. He was a stranger caught in a family moment that should never have happened. Around the table, people shifted in their seats. Some stared down at their plates. Others pretended to study the harbor outside the windows. It amazed me how quickly grown adults could become silent when doing the right thing required even the smallest amount of courage. Madison kept her arms crossed. The confidence on her face told me she expected everyone to agree with her. Perhaps they usually did. Perhaps she had spent years getting exactly what she wanted simply because nobody wished to challenge her. Daniel finally cleared his throat. I looked at my son, hoping to see at least a flicker of discomfort. Instead, he offered the same tired expression I had seen so many times over the last few years. It was the look of a man who wanted peace more than truth. "Mom," he said quietly, maybe we should talk outside. Outside. Not an apology. Not a defense. Not a simple statement that his mother deserved respect. Just another request for me to make things easier for everyone else. I folded my hands in my lap and studied him carefully. There was a time when Daniel would have crossed a crowded room to stand beside me. There was a time when he called every Sunday afternoon without fail. After Arthur passed away, those calls became shorter. Then they became occasional text messages. Eventually weeks would pass without a word. I had told myself he was busy. I had told myself life was complicated. Sitting there that night, I finally wondered how many excuses I had made on his behalf. The guard spoke gently. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" His voice carried more kindness than anything I had heard from my own family that evening. I gave him a small smile. "I am fine." Madison let out a short laugh. "She always does this." Several relatives looked confused. "Does what?" asked my cousin Rebecca from across the table. Madison straightened her shoulders. "Makes herself the victim." The words settled heavily in the room. I noticed Charlotte staring at her mother in disbelief. My granddaughter had inherited Arthur's eyes. Honest eyes. The kind that revealed exactly what a person was feeling. Right now those eyes were filled with embarrassment. "Grandma is not doing anything," Charlotte said softly. Madison turned toward her. "Charlotte, stay out of this." But Charlotte did not lower her gaze. For a brief moment, I saw the same quiet strength Arthur used to carry. It warmed something inside me. Not because she was defending me, but because it reminded me that kindness had not completely disappeared from this family. The waiter arrived with another course and immediately sensed the tension. He hesitated before placing the plates on the table. Nobody touched the food. The expensive restaurant, the beautiful harbor view, the carefully planned celebrations suddenly felt hollow. I looked around the room and realized something important. Every person there knew exactly who had organized family holidays for decades. Every person there knew who had hosted Thanksgiving dinners, birthday parties, graduation celebrations, and Sunday gatherings. They knew who mailed cards, remembered anniversaries, and showed up whenever someone needed help. Yet somehow, in a room filled with people who knew the truth, a lie had been allowed to grow unchecked. Madison believed I was powerless. Daniel believed I would quietly accept whatever happened next. They both thought this evening was about putting me in my place. What neither of them understood was that my silence did not come from weakness. It came from clarity. And for the first time all night, I felt completely calm. As the conversation around the table slowly resumed, I noticed something I should have recognized years earlier. Nobody seemed surprised by Madison's behavior. Uncomfortable, yes. Embarrassed, certainly. But surprised? No. That realization settled heavily in my chest. People are rarely shocked by patterns they have already witnessed. They are only shocked when those patterns finally become public. I sat quietly while glasses clinked and forced smiles returned. The musicians resumed playing soft jazz near the windows overlooking the harbor. Waiters continued moving between tables as though nothing unusual had happened. Yet beneath the surface, something had shifted. The illusion had cracked. For years, I had convinced myself that small slights were misunderstandings. Missed invitations. Forgotten phone calls. Family plans made without telling me. I had always found a reason. Daniel was busy. Madison was stressed. Everyone had complicated schedules. Sitting there that evening, I began connecting pieces that no longer felt accidental. About 18 months earlier, I had arrived at Charlotte's school theater performance only to discover my seat had been reassigned. Madison smiled and claimed there had been confusion with the tickets. The following Christmas, I learned family dinner had been moved to another location after I had already prepared 3 homemade desserts. Again, there had been an explanation. Last summer, Daniel sold a boat that Arthur and I had helped him purchase years before. I found out through social media photographs posted by distant relatives. Nobody thought to tell me directly. At the time, I swallowed my disappointment and moved on. Now those memories lined up like stones forming a path. The path led directly to this evening. Across the table, Daniel laughed weakly at something his cousin said, but the sound felt forced. He kept glancing toward me and then away again. A man does not avoid eye contact without a reason. Deep down, he knew this situation was wrong. What troubled me was that knowing had not stopped him. Charlotte suddenly pushed her chair back. The movement drew attention from everyone nearby. "Grandma should be sitting here," she said, gesturing toward the empty seat beside her. The room went silent again. Madison immediately frowned. "Charlotte."
No, Charlotte replied.
Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued. "Grandpa would not have wanted this." Hearing Arthur mentioned aloud changed the atmosphere instantly. Several relatives lowered their eyes. My late husband had been respected by everyone in that room. He was the kind of man who remembered birthdays, helped neighbors repair fences, and quietly paid college tuition for a struggling nephew without ever mentioning it. Arthur believed family was measured by loyalty, not convenience. Madison folded her napkin carefully. "Your grandfather is not part of this conversation." "He is the reason we are all here," Charlotte answered. For a moment, I saw genuine panic flash across Madison's face. It disappeared quickly, replaced by her usual confidence. But I had seen it. That brief crack told me more than any speech could.
She was afraid of something.
Not me. Not Charlotte. Something else. Something hidden beneath all her certainty. The thought stayed with me as dinner dragged on. Then I noticed another detail. Every time finances, property, or future family plans were mentioned, Madison became unusually attentive. Earlier in the evening, before everything happened, I had overheard her discussing real estate values near Cape Cod with Daniel. Later, she asked a cousin several questions about trust funds and inheritance taxes. At the time, the topics seemed random. Now, they felt connected. People reveal themselves in the subjects that capture their attention. By the time dessert arrived, I was no longer focused on the humiliation of the evening. I was focused on understanding why it had happened. Public disrespect is often the final chapter of a story that began long before anyone noticed. And as I watched Madison smile across the table, I became certain of one thing. This dinner was not the beginning of her plan. It was only the first time she believed she had already won. I barely tasted the dessert placed in front of me. The cheesecake could have been cardboard for all I knew. My attention had drifted far from the dining room and into memories I had spent years protecting. Arthur used to tell me that gratitude reveals character faster than success ever will. At the time, I thought it was simply one of those thoughtful observations he liked to make during quiet evenings on our back porch. Now I understood exactly what he meant. Looking around the table, I found myself remembering all the moments that had brought us here. 20 years earlier, Daniel had called me from a tiny apartment after losing his first serious job. He sounded embarrassed and scared. Arthur and I did not hesitate. We paid 6 months of his rent and helped him get back on his feet. A few years later, when he wanted to start his own business, the bank rejected his loan application. We refinanced part of our home and provided the money he needed. We never asked for recognition. We were parents. That was what parents did. Then came the years when Charlotte was born. Madison wanted the best stroller, the best preschool, the best neighborhood, the best everything. Whenever unexpected expenses appeared, somehow Arthur and I always found a way to help. We paid medical bills that insurance did not cover.
We
Funded summer programs. We contributed to educational accounts. Every check was written quietly. Every favor was given freely. Arthur always believed generosity should feel light, never transactional. Across the room, laughter suddenly erupted at another table. The sound pulled me back to the present. I watched Madison smile as she spoke with relatives, completely comfortable again. It was remarkable how quickly she recovered from causing a scene. That confidence came from certainty. She truly believed she controlled the narrative. The longer I observed her, the more I realized something else. Madison never spoke about family memories.
She spoke about assets, properties,
Investments, appearances, status. Even tonight, during what was supposed to be a celebration of Arthur's memory, she had spent more time discussing real estate markets than sharing a single story about the man whose anniversary we were honoring. That detail lingered in my mind. A year before Arthur passed away, he had noticed similar things. I remembered one particular evening in our kitchen. Rain tapped softly against the windows while he reviewed paperwork spread across the dining table. Without looking up, he asked me a strange question. If people knew less about what we have, do you think they would treat us differently? I laughed at the time. The question seemed unnecessary. Our family loved us. Or at least I believe they did. Arthur simply nodded and returned to reading. Looking back, I wondered what he had already seen. I wondered what concerns he had kept to himself. The memory unsettled me. Arthur was rarely wrong about people. As coffee was served, Daniel finally approached my chair. He stood beside me awkwardly, holding his cup with both hands. "Mom, can we start over?" he asked quietly. I studied his face. He looked tired, older than 42. But regret was not the same thing as accountability. "Start over from which part?" I asked gently. His eyes dropped to the floor. He did not answer. That silence told me everything. He wanted comfort without confrontation, forgiveness without honesty. Before either of us could continue, Charlotte appeared beside me. She placed a folded napkin in my hand and whispered, "Please read this when you get home." Her voice was barely audible. I looked at her in surprise. She squeezed my shoulder and walked away before anyone noticed. The napkin felt heavier than it should have. I slipped it into my purse without opening it. Something in her expression told me it mattered. By the time the evening finally began winding down, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The humiliation I experienced that night was not an isolated incident. It was part of something much larger. And somewhere between Arthur's old warnings, Charlotte's frightened eyes, and Madison's unusual interest in money, I could feel the outline of a truth that had not fully revealed itself yet. The drive home felt longer than usual. Boston's lights reflected across the harbor as I sat behind the wheel, replaying the evening in my mind. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the air had turned cool and quiet. My house greeted me the way it always had since Arthur passed away, with stillness. I hung my coat carefully, placed my purse on the kitchen counter, and stood for a moment in the familiar silence. Then I remembered the folded napkin Charlotte had slipped into my hand. I removed it from my purse and unfolded it slowly. Inside was not a note written on the napkin itself. Instead, a small piece of paper had been tucked inside. Charlotte's handwriting was neat but rushed. 3 short sentences covered the page. "Grandma, please do not tell anyone I gave this to you. Mom has been talking about your house for months. She says everything will be easier once you move." I read the note twice, then a third time. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. I sat down at the table Arthur and I had shared for decades and stared at the words. My house. Not memories. Not family relationships. Not my well-being. My house. A week earlier, Madison had called unexpectedly and asked whether maintaining a property alone was becoming difficult. At the time, I thought she was expressing concern. Now, the conversation sounded completely different. 2 months before that, she had asked whether I had considered moving into a retirement community. She described elegant facilities, organized activities, transportation services, and comfortable apartments. I remembered feeling surprised by her sudden interest in my future. Looking back, I realized she had not been asking questions. She had been testing possibilities. I folded Charlotte's note carefully and placed it beside Arthur's old reading glasses. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that tonight's humiliation had a purpose beyond embarrassment. Madison wanted something. Public disrespect often serves as preparation. If a person can convince others that someone is irrelevant, weak, confused, or burdensome, then removing that person's influence becomes much easier later. Around midnight, I walked into Arthur's study. Very little had changed since his passing. His desk remained organized. His framed photographs remained in place. The shelves still held decades of business records, journals, and legal documents. Arthur believed in keeping excellent records. "Paper remembers what people forget," he used to say. My eyes drifted toward a locked cabinet in the corner. I suddenly remembered another conversation from nearly a year before his death. Arthur had been reviewing estate documents with unusual focus. When I asked why, he smiled and said, "Because protecting family sometimes means protecting one family member from the others." At the time, I laughed and accused him of being dramatic. He only smiled. Standing there now, I no longer found the memory amusing. My phone vibrated on the desk. A text message appeared from Daniel. "Sorry tonight" became "uncomfortable." Madison was stressed. "Let us talk later." I stared at the screen for several seconds. Not once did he apologize for what happened. Not once did he acknowledge what had been said. The message treated the evening like an unfortunate misunderstanding instead of a deliberate humiliation. I placed the phone face down without responding. A few minutes later, another message arrived. This one came from Charlotte. "Are you okay?" 3 simple words. Yet they contained more genuine concern than anything I had heard from my son all evening. I replied immediately. "I am fine. Thank you for checking on
Me.
Then I sat quietly in Arthur's chair and looked around the room. For the first time, I stopped asking why Madison behaved the way she did. The better question was what she believed she would gain. And deep inside, I had the growing feeling that the answer was already hidden somewhere among the documents Arthur had left behind. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, casting long golden rectangles across the hardwood floor. For years, mornings had been my favorite part of the day. They felt honest. Before phone calls, obligations, and expectations arrived, there was only quiet. I made coffee and carried my mug into Arthur's study. The note from Charlotte remained beside his reading glasses exactly where I had left it. Seeing her words again strengthened my resolve. Whatever was happening, I needed facts instead of assumptions. Arthur taught me that lesson decades ago. Emotion clouds judgment. Documentation clarifies it. After finishing my coffee, I unlocked the cabinet in the corner of the room. Inside were neatly organized folders, legal binders, property records, and estate documents. Arthur had always believed that important matters should be preserved carefully. As I sorted through the files, I noticed several tabs marked with dates from the final year of his life. One folder immediately caught my attention. Across the front, in Arthur's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 simple words: Family Trust Review. My pulse quickened slightly. I carried the folder to the desk and opened it. The contents were extensive. Financial summaries, property valuations, correspondence with attorneys. Notes written in Arthur's careful script filled several pages. At first, everything appeared routine. Then I noticed a business card clipped to the inside cover. Leonard Hayes, Arthur's attorney. I remembered Leonard well. Calm, precise, impossible to rattle. He had handled legal matters for our family for years. Beneath the card was a handwritten note from Arthur. If circumstances ever become unclear, speak with Leonard before signing anything. I read the sentence twice. The wording felt deliberate. Not if.
When.
Circumstances. Unclear. My thoughts immediately returned to Madison's questions about my house, her comments about retirement communities, and Charlotte's warning. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, though I still could not see the entire image. Before I could continue reading, my phone rang. Daniel. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. "Good morning, Mom. How are you feeling today?" The question felt strange after everything that had happened. "I am fine," I replied. "That is good. Madison and I were thinking maybe we could stop by this afternoon." There was a brief pause. "We want to clear the air."
Clear the air.
Another phrase that avoided responsibility. Still, I agreed. "You are welcome to come by." After ending the call, I returned my attention to the folder. Several pages later, I found references to additional legal documents held by Leonard's office. The details were not fully included, only summarized. Whatever Arthur had arranged, it appeared more comprehensive than I realized. By early afternoon, Daniel and Madison arrived. Madison entered carrying a bakery box and a polished smile. Anyone meeting her for the first time would have thought she was the perfect daughter-in-law. She complimented my garden. She admired the curtains. She asked about my health. Every word felt rehearsed. We sat in the living room while sunlight streamed through the windows. After a few minutes of small talk, Madison gently shifted the conversation. "We have been worried about you living here alone," she said. There it was. The house again. Daniel nodded. "Maybe it is time to consider something easier to manage." I listened quietly. Madison began describing retirement communities, maintenance-free living, social activities, transportation services. The presentation sounded remarkably prepared, almost practiced. Then, she added something that made me pay close attention. "This property is valuable, Eleanor. It could really help the family if it were handled properly." Help the family. The phrase lingered in the room. I noticed Daniel glance toward her. Not surprised. Not confused.
Familiar. They had
Discussed this before. Many times. At that moment, I stopped wondering whether Charlotte's concerns were valid. They were. The real question was how far these conversations had already gone without my knowledge. When Daniel and Madison finally left, I remained seated in silence for several minutes. Then I picked up Leonard Hayes's business card and placed it beside the telephone. Whatever Arthur had anticipated years ago, I suddenly felt very certain that the time had come to find out. The following morning, I called Leonard Hayes. He answered on the second ring. Some voices remain unchanged no matter how many years pass, and Leonard's was one of them.
calm, precise,
Reliable. After a brief greeting, I explained that I had been reviewing Arthur's records and found the note directing me to contact him. There was a pause on the line. Not a surprised pause. A confirming one. "I wondered when you might call," he said quietly. Those 7 words immediately captured my attention. I sat straighter in my chair. What does that mean? Another brief silence followed. "It means Arthur prepared for several possibilities, Eleanor. He believed in planning ahead." I looked through the study window toward the backyard Arthur had loved so much. Suddenly, I felt as though my late husband was sitting 3 feet away, watching events unfold exactly as he had anticipated. Leonard suggested we meet in person the next afternoon. He refused to discuss details over the phone. The request only increased my curiosity. After ending the call, I spent most of the day sorting through additional files. The deeper I looked, the more organized everything appeared. Arthur had documented nearly every major financial decision from the past 20 years. Nothing was careless. Nothing was accidental. By evening, another message arrived from Charlotte. This time it contained only one sentence. "Please be careful what you sign." I stared at the words for a long moment. Then I called her. She answered immediately. Her voice sounded nervous. "Grandma? Charlotte, what are you worried about?" The line remained quiet for several seconds. Finally, she spoke. "I have heard Mom and Dad talking." My grip tightened slightly around the phone. "Talking about what?" Another pause. "About your house. About legal paperwork. About moving you somewhere else." The words landed heavily. Yet strangely, I did not feel shocked anymore. The pieces were fitting together too neatly. "Did they mention anything specific?" I asked. "Not exactly. But Mom keeps saying everything would be easier if you stopped making decisions on your own." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Charlotte sighed. "Grandma, I know this sounds terrible. I just do not trust what is happening." Neither did I. After we ended the call, I sat alone in the living room as darkness settled outside. The house felt different now. Not lonely. Alert. Like a person waking up after a long sleep. Looking back, I realized I had spent years assuming good intentions. Whenever something felt wrong, I searched for innocent explanations. Whenever boundaries were crossed, I minimized the behavior. Whenever respect disappeared, I blamed circumstances. That habit ends quietly. Not with anger. Not with dramatic declarations. Simply with clarity. The next afternoon, I arrived at Leonard's office precisely at 2 o'clock. His building overlooked a small park filled with summer flowers and walking paths. Everything about the setting felt peaceful. Leonard greeted me warmly and escorted me into a private conference room. A thick folder already sat on the polished wooden table. My eyes immediately moved toward it. Leonard noticed. "Before we begin," he said carefully, "there is something you need to understand. Arthur loved you very much. Some of the decisions he made during his final year were specifically designed to protect you. My heart tightened. Leonard opened the folder and adjusted his glasses. Then, he slid the first document across the table toward me. The moment I saw Arthur's signature at the bottom of the page, I knew my husband had left behind far more than memories. He had left instructions. And whatever those instructions contained, Leonard's expression made it clear that everything was about to change. My eyes moved slowly across the document. At first, the language appeared formal and ordinary, the kind of legal wording most people skim without understanding. But Leonard encouraged me to read carefully.
So I did.
With each paragraph, the picture became clearer. Arthur had established a family trust years earlier. I knew that much. What I did not know was how extensively he had updated it during the final months of his life. Leonard waited quietly while I absorbed the details. Several properties had been placed inside the trust. Investment accounts, retirement assets, income-producing holdings. Everything had been structured with remarkable precision. Then I reached a section marked Special Protective Provisions. My breath caught. Leonard folded his hands on the table.
Keep reading, he said.
The clause was unlike anything I expected. Arthur had included specific conditions regarding my care, independence, and financial authority. As long as I remained mentally competent, no beneficiary could pressure, coerce, manipulate, or publicly humiliate me in an attempt to gain influence over trust assets. If such conduct occurred, trustees were authorized to review that person's eligibility for future distributions. I looked up slowly. Leonard nodded. Arthur insisted on that language. I returned my attention to the page. Additional provisions followed. Any effort to force me from my home without my consent could trigger a formal review. Attempts to interfere with my decision-making authority could trigger a review. Actions intended to isolate me from family relationships for financial advantage could trigger a review. The room felt unusually quiet. Outside the conference room window, people walked through the park carrying coffee cups and grocery bags, completely unaware that my understanding of the past 3 years was changing with every sentence. Arthur was concerned, Leonard said carefully. Not because he distrusted everyone. He simply recognized certain patterns. My thoughts immediately returned to Madison. Her repeated discussions about my house. Her interest in moving me elsewhere. Her comments about simplifying my life. The public humiliation at the anniversary dinner. One by one, the memories rearranged themselves into a completely different story. What I once interpreted as concern now looked very different. Leonard opened another folder. Inside were copies of correspondence between Arthur and several advisors. One letter stopped me cold. It had been written approximately 8 months before Arthur passed away. In it, Arthur described his desire to preserve family harmony while ensuring that no one could exploit vulnerability created by age, grief, or loneliness. He specifically mentioned me. He wrote that I often assumed the best in people and that this quality was both my greatest strength and my greatest risk. Reading those words felt like hearing his voice again. I blinked several times before continuing. Then Leonard revealed the final piece. There is one more document, he said. He slid a sealed envelope across the table. My name appeared on the front in Arthur's handwriting. The sight of it immediately brought tears to my eyes. Not because I felt weak, because I missed him. Leonard explained that Arthur instructed him to release the letter only if certain concerns ever became relevant. He believed you would know when the time was right, Leonard said. I carefully opened the envelope. The letter inside was only a few pages long. Arthur's words were steady and direct. He wrote about love, trust, and family. He wrote about the importance of dignity. Most importantly, he wrote that if I was reading the letter, I should stop doubting my instincts. Near the end, one sentence stood out above all the others. The people who truly love you will never need your assets in order to value your presence. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. Something inside me settled. For months, perhaps years, I had questioned my own perceptions. I had minimized warning signs. I had explained away disrespect. I had accepted treatment that Arthur never would have tolerated. That uncertainty was gone now. When I finally left Leonard's office, the folder rested securely beside me. The afternoon sun illuminated the city streets as I drove home. My phone vibrated twice during the drive. Both messages came from Madison. The first asked whether I would join a family brunch the following weekend. The second said everyone wanted a fresh start. I glanced at the messages and felt a calmness that surprised even me. For the first time, I understood exactly why the invitation had arrived. And for the first time, I was fully prepared to accept it. The family brunch took place the following Saturday at Daniel and Madison's house. The invitation had been presented as an opportunity to reconnect, to move forward, to leave uncomfortable feelings behind. By the time I arrived, nearly everyone from the anniversary dinner was already there. The dining room was filled with conversation, fresh flowers, and carefully arranged dishes. On the surface, it looked warm and welcoming. Underneath, I sensed something very different. Madison greeted me at the door with exaggerated enthusiasm. She hugged me lightly and complimented my outfit. Daniel smiled more than usual. Several relatives suddenly seemed eager to include me in conversations. The transformation would have been convincing if I had not spent the previous week learning the truth. I took my seat and observed quietly. Arthur used to say that once you understand someone's motives, their behavior becomes remarkably predictable. That morning proved him right. Within 30 minutes, the conversation drifted exactly where Madison wanted it to go. Aging, retirement, simplifying life, future plans. The subjects appeared innocent enough, yet every road somehow led back to me. You deserve less stress, Madison said while pouring coffee. A smaller place might really improve your quality of life. Several people nodded politely. Daniel joined in. We just want what is best for you, Mom. What is best for you? I had heard those words many times recently. They always seemed to appear whenever someone wanted something from me. Across the table, Charlotte remained silent. Our eyes met briefly. She knew. Leonard arrived precisely 15 minutes later. His appearance surprised everyone except me. Madison's smile faltered for the first time that morning. Daniel looked confused. Leonard, he asked, what are you doing here? Leonard greeted everyone courteously before taking an empty seat. Eleanor invited me. The room grew noticeably quieter. Madison attempted a laugh. This sounds serious. Leonard smiled politely. In a way, it is. I reached into my bag and removed the folder Arthur had prepared years earlier. The sight of it immediately captured everyone's attention. Nobody spoke. Nobody reached for another cup of coffee. Even the casual background conversation disappeared. Leonard opened the folder and began explaining the trust structure Arthur established before his death. At first, the information sounded ordinary. Then, he arrived at the protective provisions. As he carefully outlined the conditions, expressions around the table began to change.
Surprise.
Confusion. Concern. Madison's confidence slowly drained from her face. Daniel stared at the documents in disbelief. Leonard explained that attempts to pressure, manipulate, isolate, or publicly humiliate me for financial advantage could trigger a formal review of beneficiary privileges. He explained that Arthur specifically anticipated circumstances in which my independence might be challenged. He explained that all such conduct was documented and taken seriously. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody challenged him. The silence said enough. Finally, Madison spoke. Surely this is being misunderstood. Leonard looked directly at her. The language is quite clear. I opened Arthur's letter and read a short passage aloud. My voice remained steady. The people who truly love you will never need your assets in order to value your presence. When I finished, the room remained silent. Charlotte lowered her eyes, visibly emotional. Daniel looked as though he had aged 10 years in a single afternoon. Madison stared at the table. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed unable to find the right words. I felt no triumph, no desire for revenge, only clarity. The uncertainty that had followed me for years was gone. Arthur had given me something more valuable than money or property. He had given me the truth. I closed the letter and stood. I am not selling my home, I said calmly. I am not surrendering my independence. And I am not responsible for making disrespect comfortable for anyone. Nobody argued. Nobody objected. As I picked up my bag, Charlotte rose and embraced me. I kissed the top of her head and smiled. Then I walked toward the door. Just before leaving, I turned back one final time. I was never poor, I said quietly. I simply stopped measuring my worth by what I could give away. Then I stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight, leaving behind the noise, the excuses, and the people who had mistaken kindness for weakness. For the first time in years, I felt completely free.